And then, starting in 2001, and essentially over the last 10 years, we have the emergence of transnational communities and the construction of transnational communities in that field. First, we have the first one is the International Competition Network that is built in 2001 under strong push from the US. And I'll get to what the ICN is in a minute. And ever since, we've seen a multiplication of parallel types of initiatives at the level of different transnational regions. So we have the European Competition Network that was born in 2004, and then in Africa, for example, but we could also look at other regions like Latin America, etc. But I'm focusing here only on Europe and Africa. We also have a number of community initiatives that emerged in the last 5 or 6 years. So the, kind of 3 groups that I will focus of communities I'll be focusing more on. On the one hand, the International Competition Network, on the other hand, the European Competition Network, and then on the third level, the African initiatives, EAC in the context of the East African Community and the COMESA, but I'll look at them together. And looking at those different initiatives, I actually identify in a sense kind of, partial typology, because obviously I haven't been looking at that many, but from those 3 explorations, I see a different type of community in each case, which in the case of the ICN I call nested community. In the case of the ECN, I call hierarchical community. And in the case of the African stories, I call flat earth community, and hopefully I'll manage to explain what I mean here. And to the 3 types of communities, I correspond, in fact, 3 paths with respect to what they do, or what they do with respect to knowledge, governance knowledge. So the ICN is clearly focused on spreading a core of existing knowledge. The ECN is built to use knowledge together, while the African communities are being built in order to create, construct institutions from knowledge, actually, which you'll see is quite an interesting story. So if I look at them in turn, the International Competition Network, I explained already why it emerged. It emerged as a consequence of the multiplication of jurisdictions with an antitrust regime, of the increasing internationalization of economic activities, and therefore the multiplication of coordination issues and conflicts. And the first stage, the way in which the ICN defined itself at the beginning, was as a transnational network with a common focus, competition all the time. And all the quotes are coming from their own self-descriptions. So initially we have 13 antitrust agencies, 2001. Today we have 110 members, which more or less exhausts the number of potential members, because the only you have to be an antitrust agency to be a member of the ICN, and they are more or less reached 95–96% of their entire population. So they are very exhaustive, very encompassing community. So they are completely virtual as a network/community. They are very inclusive, as I just said, but they also have a strategy of selectively opening themselves to what they call non-governmental advisors, to selected groups of constituents that they see as important relays to the cause of competition. Okay, so they have a clear process and strategy by which they include those people in different parts of their work and in different parts of their functioning. So from this early network with this just a common focus, they have moved towards a more political notion of community of interest. Not only do they have a common focus, but they also have a common interest, which is really to, here again I quote them, spread a culture of competition, which interestingly they very strongly associate, as they say, with a culture of markets. So they make the connection between marketization, neoliberalism, and competition very clearly in all their discussion. More recently, again, we see an evolution in their discourse, but also in what they really do. And they've started to realize that they are actually a community of governance, and they use the term themselves. And that's the head of the ICN in 2009, chairman of the ICN in 2009, saying, we, the ICN, are clearly in the business of soft law, and this is what we must continue. So we see, you know, a progressive evolution from simply a kind of club of people interested in the same things towards a political collective actor, very strongly organized, with a clear focus on the objective of, you know, producing governance knowledge and using governance knowledge. So nested community, I, you know, try to draw it that way, and basically what I mean by that, those are really still very tentative terms. So this is a very new paper. This part of the paper is very new. The theoretical part is not new, but the empirical part is a bit new. So I'm open to all your help on that. What I mean by this is that this looks at first sight, and when you look at the ICN, it looks at first sight as being very very open, very flat, very non-hierarchical. In reality, what you see very fast is that you have a very strong blue core. Okay? You have a very strong core, and the very strong core is obviously made up of the usual suspects. Okay? So the usual suspects are the US agencies, the EU agency, and then a few of the major OECD agencies. But the discourse is a very flat and non-hierarchical discourse, even though you see sometimes, actually I gave a bit of that in the paper, you see sometimes reactions from more peripheral agencies saying, hey, you know, we thought we were all partners in this, and that there was no hierarchy, so maybe we should actually change a bit the composition of the steering group. Maybe we should actually focus on some issues that pertain to our own problems, etc., etc. So there is a bit of resistance, but it's actually not very strong from what I find. So this powerful core is actually having a quite old tradition, knows what competition is, at least knows what it means by competition, knows what it means by competition regulation. So essentially the governance knowledge that is involved here is a pre-existing governance knowledge, really, to that community. It hasn't been constructed by the community. It was there before, and it corresponds to an older tradition associated with this blue core that I try to represent here. So basically what in the end happens is that essentially the role of the ICN is to diffuse, to share as widely as possible this core pre-existing knowledge, rather than really very much focusing on the construction of knowledge. So that's, I think, my understanding at this stage of what the role of the ICN is with respect to knowledge. So the way in which they work is they build different types of social control mechanisms that allows them to, you know, narrow, in a sense, the interpretative space of the different actors that are involved, both within the community and at the boundaries of the community, so that the knowledge that gets really used and implemented is increasingly convergent, or at least compatible with this older core tradition of knowledge. So, you know, different types of concrete mechanisms, cooptation through this NGA mechanism, you know, non-governmental advisor mechanism, persuasion, training, acculturation, peer pressure, sense of belonging, etc., etc. And there is, at the margin, limited co-construction on certain, you know, key issues that they identify, but it's very limited. Most of the work of the ICN is really the diffusion, the stabilization, the implementation of a pre-existing governance knowledge. body of governance knowledge. And as I said, in appearance, very democratic, very politically neutral. In reality, my argument is that this is the stabilization of very powerful hegemony, actually. So the European Competition Network was built after. It was really built, and it was, in the sense the ICN was more emergent, the ECN was built, and it was built after the ICN, and was built in the context of a number of changes in the European construction landscape. First, this was the time when the European Union started to think about the modernization of competition regulation in Europe. This was also the context of the enlargement of the European Union, which meant that actually the notion of subsidiarity became more and more important. The more members you have, the more you have to actually decentralize somewhat number of things, but at the same time that you were decentralizing, you also needed to ensure that you had some form of harmonization, and that's the idea behind the European Competition Network, which is that you both, in a sense, decentralize implementation at the level of national agencies, but you create this competition network that will make sure that the way in which the regulation is being implemented is as consistent, as compatible as possible across countries. And another important dimension of the context is obviously the progress of the law and economics tradition in the European competition community. It used to be very powerful and very predominant in the US, and it was coming at that time also in the EU, also to follow up on the whole neoliberal transformations and progress of an economics-based approach in competition, which was really new for Europe at the time.